I think we've got to go back to basics. We've got to prioritize ourselves as parents first to actually be able to sustain and actually enjoy being with my kids, enjoy the time that I might have with my partner, enjoy just my own time, and not feel like it has to be always, right, take the moment to take a nap or take the moment to get this done for myself. And that is what's complex, but it is doable, but it means that you have to strip quite a lot away, and we want everything all at the same time.
Well, we were talking about this earlier, like there's a kind of taboos around talking about like parenting and like what we do with our kids and upbringing, all that kind of stuff, and especially in this world now. I mean, guess when you started your job, there wasn't the the internet, and like social media and all that stuff is now contributing so much to, I mean, knowing as a parent of 2 teenage boys, it's a different world now from when you began, I guess.
It is a different world as far as we've moved into the technology era, and there now are different issues that present themselves, and we have come out of a global, pandemic, and we are in recession again, and we are, in the crux of, on a worldwide level, looking at governments and their policies and how they support us in society and our communities, and then how do we empower ourselves as families when we are living through times that are incredibly challenging. And I believe that generations before us had challenging times too, right? And we can, just looking at all the different types of generations and then raising their children, no doubt they had their hardship too. So I don't feel that it's just, this kind of polarized narrative that sometimes you can get, like, we've got it much harder, like a competition. Oh, you've had it much harder. Let's just forget about that. Meaning, let's support each other where we are today, how we help our young families. Excuse me. So, I think there's a numerous amount of topics that one can cover. The nuance in those conversations, social media most definitely has opened up a worldwide forum, and AI, the goodness of what can come from that, the innovation, we look at science and medicine, how things are moving forward, what that means to enhance our ability to maybe save time in some of the positions we're in, the careers we're in. But, from my standpoint, helping families, I do think that distraction is the leading kind of cause of a lot of issues that we're seeing with families, and that can then be subtitled into things like the lack of sleep that we're all having, and the interaction of how much families are allowing their children without any kind of regulation, or the amount of, ongoing time it takes to keep up to speed with how fast technology moves. And, how do we protect our children while still allowing them to, have freedom with this era that we're in now. So it's amalgamation of so many things, and we see those conversations happening regular. And I think it takes a lot of discernment in looking at what's out there, because, on those platforms, I think parents are very confused. I think they're getting a lot of mixed messages. And I think professionals in my profession, in the parenting family field, I think is part of that problem. They have families, confused with, how they should raise their children best, and, what techniques they should use. And there are then social trends that then start to, blanket across. And again, I think there's nuance in everything, and social media doesn't always give us that. You have to be thorough. So many people, for myself, will say, can you tell us about, how we can, become more confident, and and these questions are not DM answers. They're not a quick carousel. They're not one post, because I've been in this field for nearly 40 years and 20 years publicly. There is nuance, and the intricacies of a family can be very complex. And my job is to uncomplicate that, to untangle maybe some of the roads that you've gone down and found a little bit messy, and say, well, let's backtrack. Let's engineer ourselves backwards here and look at how, we can come to better answers. And that takes skill to be able to do that. And it takes patience for families to be committed to do that. And yet we want everything in 5 minutes. And we're being told we can have everything in 4 weeks. It's just simply not the case. It's simply not. So, I say all this with a very conscious mind without wanting to sound too heavy, this early in the morning, and getting deep into it. But I think we have to address it. I think you're right, Giles. We have to be able to have uncomfortable conversations. We have to talk about the untruths of parenting. We have to be able to go there and to find the time to commit to that, to resolve, to progress, to evolve, and come out the other end with, what that means for each an individual family.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a changing world that we live in. Obviously, I'm going to caveat straight away that I do not have children. So I'm probably in the worst place to be commenting on anyone's parenting. Although
not necessarily, Sophie, because, I get told that all the time. Well, what, you don't have children, what do you know? It's such an intellectual, lazy kind of response when... you've worked with so many families of so many different dynamics, and you hold a perspective that can be objective. And I think that's very useful for families when emotionally they're in the eye of they're in the eye of the tornado, and emotionally they're so invested, because again, you can question that sometimes parents will focus entirely on their parenting as if it defines who they are as parents.
Yeah.
Right.
So
and
true.
as a parent, you get to lay that landscape. You hope that you can be taught by your children, because you definitely are. I believe they're spiritual teachers, right? And they show up and they teach us what we need to learn to be more of or less of. It's a real awakening, right? But I do believe that, honestly, that we put too much onus and attachment to our children's outcome. And they will have their own personalities and temperaments, and they will, definitely be influenced in the environment in which they were raised in. But after all, they're their own individual spirit, and they're going to, make their own minds up about the decisions that they make. And the best that we can do is to work on ourselves, to be able to backtrack, reset if we need to, apologize, learn, repair, and move on and continue to build. And so, Sophie, you bring this objectiveness that I feel that if parents had more self-discipline in times when it was necessary to emotionally feel, but to step back, which is what I call SOS. Right? You step back, you observe literally everything running around in front of you. Take a minute, observe, assess, and then step back in with making a decision. Even if it's the wrong one, you find out it's the wrong one, make a decision, because from there you'll learn. So you do hold, that perspective of being able to objectively look in. And if parents can emotionally and logically mesh those two together, what I feel that over time, that practice really helps them to make sounder decisions to some degree, because it's not always based on emotionally how you're feeling, your heart being tugged at the time, because that can sometimes have to do with the parent and not the child. That makes sense?
Oh, totally. And yeah, thank you for saying that as well. I mean,
I will caveat as well that you were a teacher for many years, so you have an experience of working with children. So.
Yeah, primary school as well. So at that age where you do have to kind of look out for kids when parenting isn't going so well at home and stuff like that, and you do see
very
things
true.
It's funny because before we started the episode, I was talking to Giles and I was sort of saying it's going to be a really interesting episode because parenting is such a personal thing. And it's exactly what you said. You know, people attach so much identity to how they parent. And so you can't give advice in the same way that you would perhaps give advice on like how to furnish your room or how to drive your car, because it's such a personal thing. And I'm just wondering, well, I was going to say, how do you navigate that? It's such tricky waters.
I really appreciate you acknowledging that, because, you know, you can give advice and you're not always going to be the popular voice, right? In doing so, I have an immense amount of integrity. This is vocational work for me. I have to say what I believe is best for families and children, because it's not like toss a little bit of paint on the wall. Don't really like that color. Let's just go back. Let's just go back and get a different color. You know, I made it, you know, I made a salad. Oh, no, put the wrong dressing on. I hate that dressing. You know what? Just leave it there to the side. Don't worry, I'll toss that. Let's put that in. No, these human beings, families. Every decision that you make will have some form of impact, whether that's a plus or a minus, you know? And so, you know, for myself, starting off looking after families and then sort of, you know, being headhunted to continue to troubleshoot and to have the immense amount of experience that I've had over these decades to help different types of families and dynamics, you know, for me, this is very much vocational. So I'm not always going to be the popular voice. I mean, and I see it quite clearly on social media, you know, and people are very rude in their opinions of me wanting to shut up. But I'm not going to be quiet, and I do need to quiet that sometimes the loudest voices in the room that are not always, I believe, making good judgment and leading parents down a road that I don't think is healthy for their children as well. So, you know, being very conscious of what that means, and having worked inside. I mean, you guys have seen me for this year's 20 years. 20 years this year's of seeing me inside families' homes, and you know that they're like 18, 19-hour days. Like, you're like, yeah, but there's only 24 hours in a day. Yes, that's correct, right? And you know, I was doing that for a very long time, where 48 weeks a year, and inside people's homes, it's like, hey, Joe, do you want a cup of tea or a coffee? Because, you know, here I am still. You know, crew have gone home, and here I am still. They're like, aren't you going home though? Because the crew have all left. I'm like, no, I'm here to help you. You wanted my help, correct? Oh, yes, but I didn't realise that I would be here. I would be continuing to help you when the crew have gone. Like, no, this is very much real for me. You know, so it is really, you know, my conviction and my passion and wanting to help, you know, families in that way. And, you know, sometimes it trips you up. I just finished doing a big seminar here in California. And last night somebody was asking me a question about families. And I just burst into tears. I didn't even expect it. I was like, oh, sorry. But you just, you know, I feel so emotional and so attached to wanting to be able to pass my wisdom on and do the best that I can, because over those years, and going back to the first question, I've seen families being drip fed. You know, I've seen families, you know, be stripped of resources and funding and training. How much can you take away from society and then expect them to just cope? I mean, we're seeing that now. It was different 20 years ago. There were more resources. There were more sure starts across the nation. There were more trained social workers on the ground. I mean, God bless them. They must be exhausted and burnt out within 2 years now, you know? And so we do need just continuous training and funding to, you know, to bring up these, you know, these young men and women who have a passion as well to be able to do the same. And I'd like to think that I've had a part to play in that, in being able to, you know, feel actually I'd like to do this as a career as well. I'd like to be on the ground and, you know, maybe be a social worker or a, you know, a professional therapist or a family counselor or you know, a counselor at school, a school counselor, and being able to, you know, connect with children and their families and help them.
Amazing.
Yeah. I was going to say, actually, it's really interesting. I don't want to get too political, but yeah, the Sure Start scheme that obviously that came under Gordon Brown and Tony Blair was a big shift in the right way, and obviously we've seen that eradicated over the years. You know, I think
you're correct, actually, Charles. It was, and I remember, and I forgive me, I just don't remember. I don't remember the year, but I do remember I was filming the Supernanny shows. Tony Blair making a commitment to having what he called thousands of super nannies being able to help across Great Britain. And I was like, oh, yes, like I am definitely going to be in there to help those families. And if they want me to help train some of the individuals, the professionals that are coming up so that they can start to recognize, you know, the small intricacies and nuances of family dynamics so that we can get to the bottom and really in helping these families. It looked good on paper and what happened to it, you know, but yeah, it would be great to do that. And look at number 10. Sophia Giles, I'll look at number 10. Yeah. Hey, can we have 100,000, please, so that we can, you know, be on ground level with families?
Yeah.
And be able to help them every day. So yeah, it just disappeared. It's like some magic show. It just went.
Yeah,
you know?
That's with lots of things, unfortunately. It's really tricky for parents at the moment. I see it with like my friends. You know, I've got friends that have children that they're struggling with, and they're like, they just don't know what to do. And then you know, you can speak to social workers, but often the social workers don't know where to sort of point them and which direction, because you know they're massively sort of overworked and underfunded and all the rest of it. It's really, really tricky, really sad.
And that's the dominoes, right? So, you know, the social workers have some skill sets, but they don't know, you know, they're packed. They're understaffed, you know, and again, they're not being given the funds to provide. So you take away, and then you're not putting in to society, to community. And then this is the outcome. It's kind of, in a way, it's like families that are in a space where they say, Joe, I don't know what to do. I've taken away the iPad. I've taken away their football. I've taken away this. And I say, can I ask you what you've put in? Can I ask you what have you put in? Because if you take everything away, I call it lifers mentality, right? If you know, what have you got to lose? If you take everything away from everyone, you're in prison for life. You've taken everything away. So, okay, I'm in here for life anyway. You know, what do I get? What am I doing? So again, that kind of mindset does not help resolve a lot of, you know, band-aid, right? Let's just shove a plaster over here. Let's just, you know, oh, a little bruise over here. No, these are deep, and they need to be resolved from roots. You need grassroots, right? And so these, you know, the education, children's departments need to be able to, and I would be very willing to have these conversations and saying, look, here's where we start, but it's going to take some money, and it's going to take, you know, these programs of training and staffing, and let's get back to what you took away, so that our families have hope, so that our families have the resource of education that they need, so that they have, you know, professionals to be able to consult with, to have as confidence, you know, in their lives. And again, that creates that community spirit, that community service of us all being able to help each other, when we can go back to generations before and it was extended. It's not extended now, is it? You know, and everybody's living in different places, and they're living in different boroughs and regions. And so we don't have that, you know, really your mum next door and your auntie 2 streets down and that kind of family, extended family.
Where does it, this passion for helping families and working with children, so where does that come from?
I love children. I love working with children. I love children. So, everything that I do is about being able to provide them with, with healthier environments, so that we are on the other spectrum as adults, not having to deal with, should I say, less generational trauma or less problematic circumstances that can sometimes stifle young adults. So if we look at what we don't want, then I think it starts at home for me. I think everything starts at home. And I've always loved children. I've always had a passion for children. And to me, it wasn't something I was very, very aware of. I just loved, even as a child, my parents would say to me, as a child, you were a social butterfly, always talking to other children, always playing. You're just this, sprightly young girl that just wanted to make friends and play. And, that's always been you. So that, they were never, unfortunately, my mother passed away when I was a lot younger. But, my father tells me, really not surprised, Jo. You always loved being around children. It's, to me, it doesn't surprise me that you're helping children and, doing what you're doing and being able to use your life experience with work, helping families.
It's interesting that you mentioned generational trauma as well. I feel like that's quite a new thing that we're just sort of learning about now in the mainstream. And I feel like maybe you were quite we were quite ahead of the curve on that one. Because I know you mentioned earlier as well that we're sort of products of our environment growing up. And when I think about how I was brought up by perhaps my dad, and then I think, well, actually how he was brought up by his dad, it is like a trickling stream that kind of comes down the generations, and you see these issues popping up. So I feel like you were quite ahead of the curve on that one.
Funny, somebody said that last week to me as well. You were ahead of that.
Yeah.
It's really hard to show that when you're helping families, but with network, you only have a certain period of time. You have 46, 42 minutes, depending what country you're in. And, a lot of the families that I were helping certainly had practical, tangible techniques that they needed. But also those families, respectfully, needed the counselling that you wouldn't always see on camera. And some of that was shown if I felt that it had integrity in the way that it could fully be presented, and other things were too heavy, and they were not my story to tell. They were not my story to tell. And so, you help and you continue to help the families. And there are moments when the cameras are not in the room. I'm like, I need this space, unplug, and I need to work with, this father, this mother, and we need to be able to do that work. And that generational trauma work that you speak of, trauma as in your emotional need was not met, right? You didn't have the support, because words have become so flippant now, haven't they? Right? Overused, where you feel like, do they have any weight, any gravitas at all, right? Because of mainstream. But being able to have that ongoing conversation with the families allows me to be able to do the work with the parents that allows them to be able to sort of separate their own inner child, right? To the work that they're doing as a parent. And yet, in my experience, a lot of that suppressing comes up to the surface sometimes only when you have children. So having children will just bubble that all up and make you reflect and think about your own family, and then self-reflect about your own family dynamic. And if you get to a place, and sometimes that's not always a place you decide you want to be at, but if you get to a place where you can truly, in an emotional, mature fashion, understand that your parents were just doing the best they could with the means that they had, and then their families and their families, perhaps there's room for you to be able to, forgive them for how they showed up because they didn't know any better. And sometimes maybe not. I don't always think that, I don't always think that people want to do that, and respectfully, that is what it is. But yeah, it was quite ahead of its time, because we're now seeing all of these conversations unfold on social media, right? Every conversation, people talking about parenting. So hopefully it kind of triggered everything else for people to be talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of connects in with what we were talking about earlier, in that parenting is such a personal thing. And I think it is quite common nowadays for people to kind of maybe in some ways sort of blame their parents for a lot of stuff. Like, oh, well, this happened when I was a kid, so that's why I do this, and blah, blah, blah. And then obviously these are conversations you probably can't have with your parents, because then they'll probably be like, well, what are you talking about? You had a great childhood.
You don't know what it was like for me.
I was brought up post World War II, when we had nothing. So it's an awkward area, really, sort of addressing this generational trauma, and even addressing that there is an issue in the first place.
You might not need them to do that. I don't think you need your parents to admit to how things were for you in order for you to move on. I just don't think you do. But it does allow you to reflect on your own childhood. I mean, look, I think every parent screws up. I mean, quite frankly, how do you go through it perfect? And there's no such thing as perfect. And so I always said, can we just spend more time in being present, like truly present, right? Rather than perfection, because you're not going to get it. And I think imperfection to some degree is perfection, right? And so for me, helping these families understand that it's like, you don't need it. You want it. You may want it really badly. But some families, or I might even go to say a majority of families, can be very emotionally immature. Because, families in those past generations, I don't think had a wealth of emotional intelligence. To some degree, it was a privilege if you really had that.
Yeah, so true.
And so, if now we're becoming more aware of the importance of that, the hope is that we can give that to our children and find the middle ground. Because I do think, I've always operated from the middle, not the polarized world we see of parenting, right? The extremes of the way people are parenting, where it's all or nothing, either authoritarian or very permissive. My style is authoritative, even though for some reason, because people have seen me professionally, have to be quite militant, committed, consistent, foot on the pedal when I've needed to be to get the outcome that's needed in a crisis. They'll be like, oh yeah, that Jo Frost, she's very strict, she's very harsh, and I'm not strict. I am firm but fair, and I believe that is authoritative parenting. And I do believe that because we've seen such polarized parenting play out on social media, there has to be a middle ground. And I'd like to think that I've always held that middle ground. Yes, we want to always be able to connect with our children emotionally. Yes, we all know, we've all heard the importance of really feeling seen. And did you hear what I said? I don't feel like you've even validated. I feel like you've minimized what I've had to say. But you also have to have healthy boundaries. You have to be able to have healthy boundaries. It's not acceptable at all for a child to be slapping you across the face and hitting you the way they do, or showing up in the playground and just pushing other children over. We're all like, oh yeah, but they're little. And then we get to 16 and 17-year-olds and we're like, it's the same behavior, right? It's just that it's with little children. And where was the lessons learned in between? So finding the middle ground of being able to say, look, let's parent from the middle. Let's recognize that, yes, we want to be able to do all of the things that make our children feel seen, especially in technology area when everyone's like this, looking at their phones, right? Constantly. And children are like, I, you're focusing more on here than on me, right? And these kids get to 13, 12, 13, 14, and they've got peers and other people now who are influencing them. You're going to lose them if you're still here, right?
Yeah.
And you're not actually, connecting with them. And that goes back to how technology can be a distraction and the importance of us in real time, face to face, body in front of body, being able to have these experiences to connect you together. But having that middle ground has got to be just that. It's got to be where I can support you, I can be a soundboard, I can be non-reactional continuously so that I can start to respond to what you're saying, so that I can open up a safe space for you to be able to say, Mom, I really messed up. Dad, I screwed up.
Yeah.
17-year-old comes to you, I screwed up. And I need to share something with you. All right, let's take a look. Will they say something afterwards? I think a parent who's really conscious will. But they will absolutely help you to start working out how you navigate the situation that you found yourself stuck in. So the middle ground is really important for me. And I don't feel like it's very present at the moment.
Yeah, there's definitely from my social media at least, I see there's a lot of sort of what do they call it, gentle parenting.
There's lots of phrases now, isn't there, like snowplow parents and helicopter mums and all these kind of phrases where we're obviously for those who don't know, like snowplow parenting is if you try and sort of move every barrier out of the way for our kids, that we make everything very easy for them. We don't give them any sort of resilience. And that's and there's lots of phrases like that coming out now. And we live
doing helicopter, doing everything for concierge parenting. We provide everything for them. And again, it will go back to, why does the parent feel the need to do that? I will go straight back to the parent, because Sophie, you are right. You can't blame. You can't say, well, you can say, I understand. You can say, I understand why. I'm more aware. I'm totally getting this in why I show up. Now, what are you going to do about it? Because once your eyes are open, they can't be shut again. So then what will you choose? Where will the self-responsibility be for you to be able to take action that helps you break from that mold, break from that cycle, and not become the victim of it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, what am I going to do? I mean, it's just my life. And you're either going to find 1,000 hurdles to stop you from moving forward, right? Or you're going to break those down. So you can find an excuse not to do the work, or do the work. But doing the work takes a lot of courage, and doing the work is bloody painful. And doing the work feels really scary, because I've sat and I've lived it with hundreds of families. It's scary, especially for those families that don't have the support. The fear that if I fall, I don't know where the safety net is. I don't know who's going to catch me. If I fall, will I get back up again? That does take a level of faith, right? It takes a level of faith to some degree, in knowing that we're all a lot stronger than we really believe we are. And it goes back to then what we feed our minds with. And I think what you watch and where you spend your time and the energy behind what you watch, I think matters a lot, because subliminally we're being hit with so much. And I do feel that sometimes it carries a negative or a positive energy.
Oh, totally. Yeah, they say, don't they, you should be the gatekeeper of your own mind. Let's go back to that, the sort of concept of being more present as a parent. Now, obviously, we're seeing a lot of like social media, phones and TVs and iPads, and not just with parents, but now like young children have their own phones and their own iPads, and the TV's constantly on, and it's like the second babysitter, right? Like you just stick the kid in front of a device and it keeps them quiet for hours and hours. Thoughts and feelings on that? Is there happy medium? Is it sort of, I mean, I can imagine you probably get a lot of parents message you like, what do I do? Am I doing it?
Yeah, how much screen time do they need?
Yeah,
Like, or should they let them have, kind of thing?
Right.
Look, that's the surface issue, right? The surface issue is, how much screen time should I let them have? I think even when you tell parents, they are still going to be dealing with the root cause. I walk into homes and I see surface issues. When I walk in, and what you see is a surface issue. But what's the root cause of all of that? What's the bottom line? What's the root cause? If I can get to the bottom of that, then I can make a real impact with that family that's sustainable, that has longevity, long past once I've gone. And so, yes, there are the surface questions of, what age my child be on social media. Look, we know the Duke of Cambridge, and her Royal Foundation is working heavily in being able to be very present with the professionals that she's working with to talk about the importance of brain development for our 0 to 5-year-olds. And I do believe, really, I don't think children should have any social media up until the age of 3 years old. I really don't. I think it's a crucial, vital time in which the brain is, building, structuring, synapses, all building, right? And I think human interaction is what's most important, so that we are able to sit beside, in front of our little ones, and being able to, build upon, right, what's necessary in that development stage. I think as you get into the sort of vignettes of little, cartoons here and there, I think short, sporadic viewing is absolutely fine. But again, that's all surface. You then look at 8-year-olds, 11-year-olds, and you look at maybe the games that they want to play. That's a question altogether, because parents are not responsible in being able to do more homework in the type of video games that they're playing, or behind the chat scenes in these rooms with the video games that they're playing, or age appropriate that simulate, this violence. And so there has to be, you have to, as a parent, I believe, be more sensible and understand exactly what you are allowing your children to enter, right? Look, you would do it if it wasn't on virtual landscape. You're with your children, you're in the park, and somebody says, oh, if they go through that room there, if you open up the door and you go through that room there, oh, there's going to be, you wouldn't go, okay, off you go, I'll open up the door and you go. You wouldn't do that, would you? If you were actually with your children physically somewhere where somebody said, if you go through that door, your child's going to be objectified sexually. Go through that door, they're going to be groomed. If you go through that door, you wouldn't do it. So again, it's a virtual door, right? In order for us to understand what these doors are and how we protect our children, from going through them. Yeah, and I think that's really important. So, there should be regulation around, as a parent, regulating the amount of time that children are spending on these video games or for entertainment. We know that it's used for school, and that's important. This is the progression, right, that they're using the iPads, the PCs for school. But how much is that entertainment? And when it becomes more than it is with you physically connecting with your friends, knocking for them, meeting up, right? Hey, we're going to get together, and physically being with them, I think it's a problem. Because now we're looking at how it's going to hinder socialization skills, how it's going to hinder, cognitive skills for our 0 to 5s. And so you can talk to the cows come home about the importance of it, like everybody else is, to a point that it's going in one ear and out the other. For me, I want to know why. And I don't think that we can have many conversations that don't go back to the political temperature of how we're going to support these families. Because I don't think that parents do not, I know that there are parents that obviously need educating and awareness to learn, but I don't think there is a mass amount of parents that don't know. They know. the child is on the iPad too long. They know that they've just given them the phone, but they're exhausted. They're burnt out. Families are holding down 2 jobs, some of them 3 jobs, just to pay the bills, just to keep the lighting on, just to put a basic meal on the table for their children. So I'm not going to dumb down families because, you know, there are a lot that know this, but they're exhausted. And it's a way of being able to detach so that they can catch a break. And it's a negative way of being able to do that because it feeds into what's not helping them and creating more anxiety and creating more negative ways of being able to, you know, really help yourself to come out of a space that feels suffocating. You can hit, I'm doing this because that's how it feels, you know, when I'm helping these families, it feels very suffocating for them. So yes, I would like to be able to say that if any family truly knows, I know what I'm doing here and I know it's not good and I'm still doing it, I would ask them, I hope that they would listen to this and go, today's the time I'm going to change it. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to do it every day. I'm actually going to just maybe let them have this opportunity just a little bit on a Saturday and a Sunday. But let's just start seeing what we can do to fill in where I kept giving the phone or I kept giving them the iPad. What can we do as a family? And I think that looks at not spinning so many plates, saying yes to everything, feeling like your kid's got to go to every class, feeling like they've got to go to everything. I think we've got to go back to basics. We've got to prioritize ourselves as parents first. I can't do it. I just can't do 4 days. You know, it's going to have to just be once. Right now, I am in crisis mode of taking myself out of the red light and I need to shift down into the green light. And the only way I'm going to do that is to recognize that this is going to take time and it's a process of how I start to recover and to revitalize what's necessary for myself as a person to actually be able to sustain and actually enjoy being with my kids, enjoy the time that I might have with my partner, enjoy just my own time and not feel like it has to be always, right, take the moment to take a nap or take the moment to get this done for myself. And that is what's complex, but it is doable, but it means that you have to strip quite a lot away. And we want everything all at the same time. I mean, just look at the industry of movies. We're now binge watching everything. Yeah, they now bring everything out. We used to think, oh, I've got a whole week. I'll watch that on Tuesday and I'll catch up because it's not on again till Monday. No, everything's down. Everything's the urgency is all binge, and we just put more and more and more and more on top of ourselves. And we have a culture. We have a culture that absolutely we're applauding all of that. 30 plates spinning. Oh, look at us. Look at us. Yeah, I'm looking at you and you look exhausted. I'm looking at you. Do you have a good friend, a family member that's going to say, listen, I know you're doing all of this, but at what point do we take that martyr crown off and go, you're exhausted? At what point?
Yeah.
You know, and we've all been there. I mean, I've been there. I've been there to a point where I've had panic attacks, anxiety. You know, I had that predominantly when my mother passed away. You know, you keep going, you know, you feel like you're handling grief and you keep going. And then one day, fracture. You're like, oh, you know, so some people have those temperaments, right? They keep going until they stop. And others not so. That's me. In there, doing, and then broke, right? And then I had to go, oh, hold on a minute. Not so invincible now, Joe, are you? Hold on a minute, right? It's a real life lesson. Because when that happens, you then have to start to look at what you take off your plate and what you prioritize and how you build from there. And when that happens, you never want to go back there again. So you become stronger in being able to say yes and no. You put healthy boundaries in place. Let's talk about boundaries.
It's my
Right.
favorite topic.
This is Sophie's favorite thing, boundaries.
Giles always makes fun of me. Giles makes fun of me all the time.
Sophie.
I've even made a note of it and made a smiley face by it.
Somehow I managed to get boundaries into every conversation we have. I'm like, it's just all about boundaries, it's all about boundaries. But it's true, and I think it's more about when you kind of have an epiphany at some point in your life when you haven't got any boundaries, and then you suddenly start putting them up. It's such a game changer. And it is, and I wonder, when I was listening to you talk then, I was thinking, I wonder if as a society we do have a kind of fear of, or an aversion I should say, of stillness and quietness, and also boredom as well, especially with children.
Huge.
It's like we're afraid to let our kids be bored.
Well, I'd also say, as a parent of 2 teenage boys, they can't cope with boredom.
Right.
You know, we have conversations about this all the time with them, actually, with one of them in particular, my youngest, and he literally cannot cope with boredom.
Yeah.
And because he's so used to being stimulated all the time.
Overstimulated.
And actually sort of, I have to sort of say to him, look, the greatest moments for me of like in creativity and coming up with stuff like anything, I'm daydreaming and everything, is because I'm bored. You know, and like we say, because we live in a society where boredom isn't allowed. You know, we binge watch programs, we've got phones, we can go on social media, we've got apps, we've got phones, we've got games, everything. Like, we don't allow ourselves to be bored. It's one of the greatest things to be bored.
We don't realize that the real gift of that. We don't even look. I mean, look at this. It's just come to my mind. Do you remember when you'd go on the train? You know, you'd be on the train and you'd sit there and you'd look at people's faces, and then somebody would catch your eye. You go, you know, smile. You'd smile, and then maybe somebody would stare a little bit too much, and you're like, oh, you know, and put your head down for a minute, break the thing, and then come back up again, and you know, somebody would be like banging their head when they were falling asleep from work, you know, and you'd be back again. But you know, just the observations, right? The observation of life and people, and we don't allow ourselves to do that, to the point that even in cars. Look out of the window, children. Observe. You know, that car's broke down. There's a banner over there. Oh, look, there's a shop. Observe. You're taking in. Well, what are we taking in? We're taking in the wrong stuff. Because what are we learning from that? And so, you know, rightly so, with what Giles is saying, is that, you know, our kids have been so used to click, 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 which we know rewards this part of the brain, right? And that dopamine high, beep, 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 that when it's beep, it does feel like flatline, like more than a minute. And if you can just get past that, oh, you hear so clearly, you hear so much, right?
Totally.
And so it has, to some degree, created this kind of real pit of children not wanting to do that, because we fill in, you know, mind the gap. We filled in the gap. We have filled in the gap so much so that if children are just sitting for a minute, I honestly will just let them sit. I will not continue. I will not continue the verbal ping pong of them coming over and saying, "Well, you know, I'm still bored," and you know, I may say to them, "Well, you know, think about maybe some of the things you need to catch up with at home, or, you know, I've got a few things on my list if you want to be able to help me do those, you know." But we do have to, I think that it's a real gift to be able to get to that place of recognizing what it's like to be still. And I think even adults, you know, struggle with that, just struggle to sort of, you know, sit with themselves. And we know why. In some of those instances, it could be due to a lot of that technology and, you know, filling in the gap, but also because it brings up stuff that I think just innately wants to come up.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable sitting with yourself, and people nowadays, we call it meditation, but my dad, for example, who's a different generation, he calls it sitting. You know, for me, I have to put time aside to sit and be with my thoughts, and I just don't think we do that anymore. I'm thinking about when I was a kid, before we had, you know, like iPads and phones and games and stuff, and I used to go up to my mum and say, "I'm bored," and she'd go, I'll find you something to do. And then I'd go, oh, no, it's okay. And then I'd go off and find something to do. And that's, you teach yourself how to kind of occupy yourself. It's a skill that I just don't think we teach children anymore.
I don't think we ever did teach them. I don't think we ever did. And I do think, obviously being British myself and now, back and forth America and here, I do think though that we've been quite resistant to that. If you think about the teachings, they're Western and Eastern philosophy together, right? This sort of, not abandoning sort of medicine and the importance of the part that plays, but also understanding Western and Eastern philosophy, holistic measures. And I think in England, we have started to become more accustomed to both mergers, maybe over the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think as a country, we were very accepting of what other countries were doing. We were very, that's woo-woo stuff, or we shrug it off. We can take a knock on the chin, we're proud Brits and, we can handle this. And there was that kind of cultural sense on anything, I believe, that sort of led to the progression of how we could help ourselves. Would you not agree with that? I mean, I felt that in England, especially as, social media started to open up and there were more practices of what could be available for us to help ourselves as human beings. And I did feel this kind of resistance. And now we see everything more mainstream, and and now I don't think you can go very far without seeing some kind of yoga class or Pilates or some kind of, meditation or even, a deep breath trauma class somewhere being offered, which is great. I think it's fantastic that we've, got to that space. But I don't think that necessarily was happening consistently with older generations, period.
Oh, no, not at all.
That kind of mindfulness of being able to do that, I think it was probably masked with a lot of other things, especially with pop culture in England.
Yeah, totally. No, it does seem like it's become more of a modern thing. I'm also interested to hear your thoughts, segueing on from talking about sort of the Western world and Western lifestyle on diet. And I know that, going back to sort of Supernanny era, you would sort of look a little bit at what the children are eating and, are they hyped up on sugar? Are they just eating crap all day long and then they're running around amok and you're sort of like, well, no wonder kind of thing. Do you find that diets are changing and is that a huge impact? Is what the kids eating, does that play a huge role, or is that a sort of, again, like a symptom, as you say?
I don't think we can exclude the importance of a healthy food plan for families, period. Because sugar is very addictive. And if we think about food and the food industry and them wanting to have longer shelf life, then we are looking at that sodium in those foods. And, all of that does play a part in the overall health of a child. And so I think it's important. It's a huge part of the wellness of a family in being able to look at, the types of foods that they are consistently eating. Families, again, going back to basics of them just learning how to cook basic food. And, for a lot of families, we have a food network and lots of predominant figures, making amazing meals. And, I think Jamie Oliver has been very instrumental. I think
it's been great.
It's been great. And I think he got a lot of pushback from parents where, his heart was in the right place and he was trying to do the right thing for parents when it came to school dinners, because it does play an impact on the type of focus and attention your child is going to have when they're there to absorb the education that's being given. So I do think it plays a big part. And if we start, if I look at the UK and then I look at the USA, I mean, the type of foods that they've got going on in their schools, in the mornings, nothing that I believe is, of nutritionist value, right? That's going to sustain the fuel needed, the concentration, the brain fuel, and so it is a big thing when I go into families. I want to look at the type of foods that they're eating and the value of that, meaning, is it creating cravings where they are blood sugar levels dipping? And then that's a contribution to behavior, right? Timing of, the cornerstones of, creating routines that honor the importance of the body receiving, the protein and the fuel that it needs that's going to help. And I feel that commercialism and marketing play a big part in creating a negative mindset of that, because all the commercials, are like, if you need your kids to eat vegetables, then pop it, in this pasta sauce and do it in this. And I think if you just start off, Annabelle years ago, Annabelle come out. I mean, she's still out there doing the good work.
Right? We had that
She's
was
still
the
doing
first
good work,
children's
making a
cookbook
bread.
we had. Our family cookbook was Annabelle Carmel. It was amazing. There were so many great
Annabelle.
recipes in that. Yeah.
A wonderful friend.
God, that's taking me back. I'm going to write that down.
She's doing the good work from the beginning, though. From the beginning. And I think, when you have someone like herself from the beginning, I mean, those menus, were fantastic and simple and easy, right? And, as somebody who was a professional career nanny for many years before I started consulting, and then, on this platform, I mean, that's part of your job, cooking good, healthy meals and understanding the importance of them getting, those vitamins and the importance of vitamin D and their omega-3s. And, absolutely. But, it does start that early in being able to be in good practice of the types of foods that you can cook for your children, and being consistent with that as a family. So yes, it does have an impact on our children's health. And I do believe that has to be, and it has to dance with the real tangible practices that one can apply, which is the work that I do in bringing families to the table. You've seen me with young children that, 3 years old, still on baby puree. And at the end of 10 days, they're eating sushi. I mean, that was purely changing practice. You've seen parents swear their children have adverse eating restrictions. And what they had, those children, was a mother that was looking at their face with disgust anytime they went to eat something. Again, that's practical parenting skill sets that I can, hand over that wisdom to families to change the onset. Or children that realize, I can pull the other one here. It's got bells on, and make, because there's nothing, I believe, more sensitive than that for a parent. Because what's the worst case scenario? Oh, they're going to end up in hospital. They're going to be malnourished. They're going to end up on a drip. They're going to end up dehydrated. They're not going to eat. And kids will go that far, right, in convincing that I only want this to eat. I have made a homemade burger and wrapped it up in a McDonald's wrapper, and the child ate it. And this child was, his heels were dug in. I remember in Amsterdam, heels were dug in. Homemade burger, wrapped it up in a McDonald's. And I looked at the parent and I said, "You're going to tell me he's got a problem here?
Wow.
Are you going to tell me it's about your food? Are you going to?
Come on. A mindset thing.
And so, like I've always said, it's not that kids wake up with an agenda. It's just that I think parents, and I empathize with the struggle and the challenge. I really do. I've been in your homes. I've seen how difficult it is. And again, we cannot have this conversation without going back to how are we being supported as a society when we are struggling to discern whether our kids are not going to have breakfast today or whether they're going to have a warm bedroom to sleep in. You can't have any of these conversations without touching that. It would be really mindless, and uneducated to not have that. But at the same time, I do want parents to understand that it takes a lot more effort than what some of them may be putting in. And I do want to say that is especially more difficult for those parents who are struggling with children who have, neurodivergent children, right? Because again, it can be a texture thing. Again, it can be a sensory processing, right? And again, it can be the rigidness of same. So it becomes especially more difficult. But I do believe it's incredibly important when we talk about the wellness of family that we also look at the types of foods our children are eating. And I know it's not realistic. There are a lot of people out there preaching, just eat organic and I'm like, have you seen how much food is at the moment? Have you seen the increase of food? And have you seen how much more it is can we just go back to basics again? Can we just start with them eating a couple of satsumas and having some berries with their oatmeal and peanut butter? Can we just go back to that? Let's just start back to that. And I think again, when I first came out publicly in 2004, there was a big spike in all these kind of food programs, right? Nigella and Jamie and Gordon and all these great meals, and we just kind of escaped into the delight of these colorful recipes. And what was great to see is that there started to be books that started to honor the importance of really the amount of time that people do have, and what could we make that really would be simple. And it does come down to, I think, the basic kind of cooking skills and starting there first, but also looking at perhaps just conquering the meals that you can do really well and just starting off with those, and then building your confidence more and more, instead of just kind of grabbing more so than less a convenient meal that will have a higher sodium or sugar intake. So just start off with what you know first, and then just build upon that. Especially with teens, you can get them involved. So the education starts really young. It starts really young, and I can sit with 7-year-olds, that can't even tell you, what a courgette is. They're not even naming vegetables.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, about the education of it all, and also just modeling. And I know, again, it goes back to like busy lifestyles and just surviving rather than sort of thriving. But parents are obviously sort of like eating separately to their kids because they're just like so busy and they've got work and stuff, so they're not sitting down as a family. The children aren't witnessing their parents eating well, and they're not witnessing parents cooking. So
and having that time together to just digest the day.
Yeah.
Correct. And then you look at, really what we're discussing here are some of the principles that were laid down for us in the 70s and the 80s. So do they need to come back? Some of that, absolutely. But is that possible with the state, the climate of what we're living in right now? No, it's not realistic at the moment. So let's take what we can take from it. If we can only get 2 nights out of that week, then we take those 2 nights. You see, again, you can find excuses for why you can't do it, or you can have a mindset of saying, we know that would be healthier. We know that we would have a conversation, catch up with the kids. It would become a sociable thing for us all together around the table. We could honor that perhaps more easily on the weekends and only a couple of times during the week. However, if we don't prioritize that as important, then it won't get done. And let's not ignore now, because this has come up more and more for me over the last 6 years, that families that need to be working and, 2 parents who are now having to work. One of them doesn't want to, but they both have to. They wish that when they were together and having a family, that one living wage would have allowed the other one to have the opportunity to stay at home and raise the children and be there And that's what we see now. A lot of, parents trying to do side hustles and make money while they're at home with the children. Those families that are working those jobs and they're working those long hours, and maybe they do not have bosses who are understanding the importance of that flexibility. For those parents who are at home with children, they're keeping their children into daycare, like 12 hours, 12 hours, 13 hours a day. And they're so young, these children. They're so young. Starts from like, anywhere from 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 6 months, for some families. And they're so young, and then they haven't seen their parents all day. And the only thing they want is to be able to emotionally connect with their families, with their mummies, with their daddies, and to be able to play with them and hugs. And they haven't enough time. And the parents thinking, right, got the little one home, kiss, how's your day? Good, sit down, get this done, production, bed, bath, book, in you go. And so this cycle continues. And it's a really heavy one. It's a really heavy one, because for those nurseries as well, they have an agenda that I don't always think suits what's really going on in the child's life right now with family. They may make them go to sleep at a certain time and say, right, head on pillow, it's time for a nap. The lunch times and the little snacks in between, they have to now change according to when families are coming home as well. Because sometimes those snacks are at like 2:00 and parents are not picking kids up. They've had nothing, and kids are not being picked up until 6:00. And then they're trying to get them in bed by like 7:30, 8, and they've had nothing. By the time they get their children, they're like raging wolves. They've had nothing to eat.
Yeah.
They're hungry, and you'll see the temperaments, the behavior, and then they want as well. And it's a perfect storm. It's a perfect storm.
So interesting.
So that has to change as well. We have to start, nurseries need to start looking at the amount of time that they have children and start talking to the parents and saying, look, we need to get a sort of generality of, how many hours people are working and, when they're picking their children up, and how do we create, a system within the nursery that supports these children so that, again, it helps the bigger picture of when they're home with their families, but again, short of staff. And I mean, they're paying nursery staff next to nothing to look after your most precious. So, again, all these, all these stepping stones, right? All these difficulties that families have to continue to navigate means that we have to, with urgency, look at our own family. Whilst we know we have the power to vote, whatever country we're in, and actually both countries are going to be going through that, right? The UK and the USA. Whilst we have the power of our vote, because I think that's important, right? That we are involved in that. At the same time, we have to take a look at our own home and go, right, where is the crisis here? Because I do think families are in crisis. No. I do. There's no two ways about it. They're hurting. These waiting lines, for assessments for families just feeling out on a limb. I have more than I know what to do with when it comes to families needing the help. It's overwhelming. I speak to other professionals and therapists, and they have the same. We need more help. We need more. The supply is less than the demand, right? Mm-hmm. But what do we do as family then? Well, we can't just say, well, that's a hurdle. We need to really sit down and say, right, how do we change just the smallest of things to make a huge impact? Because actually small change can make a huge impact, right? So let's take a look at the smallest things that we need to get, we need to get better. We need to sharpen up as a family, because we know it will make a huge impact for us to stay together and connected as a family. And that takes a moment to carve that out. You literally have to. If I help a family, they take 2 weeks off. They literally have to take 2 weeks off, or we'll work around maybe a half day of something if I'm specifically helping one particular parent, right? Or, excuse me, if it's a single parent, well, look at the support system that they have. And if they don't have that, then I'll make sure that we provide that for them. If I specifically need time with just one person, you know, and they're a single-handed parent, you know, so again, it does take time and organizing to say, right, how are we going to at least start, get our first step on the ladder so that there is a plan in action for us to come from the red light eventually into the green lights. And that is a process. Some things are 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. You see me, you see me do that with families. And families that have those particular issues, it's viable, right? But for the longevity of families and everyone's wellness, yeah, you'd have to look at long game. It's long term. Everything's long term. It's not about short, quick fixes. It's an immediate relief, right? Just like distraction of iPads and other things. So it takes the work. So it's a tall order. It's a tall order, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible because there are many people that are doing it and they're doing it tremendously. And I say that in awe of the single families as well. The single-handed parents out there, man, they are doing an amazing job as well, because sometimes they get a bad rap. They get a bad rap still, you know, and they're doing it. So, you know, I salute them. And Sophie used to be a teacher. So, you know, I hope we can get back to a space where we can start appreciating teachers, because the work that they did,
my wife's a teacher.
Yeah.
Sorry?
My wife's a teacher, so I'm well on board with that.
So we need to, you know, when pandemic hits, teachers were like saints, you know, the work that they were doing and sacrificing their own families.
Yeah.
These teachers had families of their own, sacrificing their own families, and they were God sent. You know, the stuff that we saw on social media with respects to, you know, some of them are quite funny. You know, like, how am I going to teach my kid how to play the clarinet? How am I going to teach them how to do, you know, how am I going to teach them how to do, I haven't got a clue. It's not the same. And as soon as we've kind of come out of it this year, I can feel the tone again, this resistance, you know, this resistance. And I do believe there's a lot on teachers' plates that shouldn't be, because it starts at home. You know, we're expecting our teachers to...
Well, I would say, Jo, teachers have to be social workers and mental health advisors, mental health first aiders, teachers, obviously, and then there's all the admin and paperwork goes with it as well.
Well, there's a reason why I'm not doing it anymore. Put it that way.
But what a shame, right? Because what a beautiful, dedicated, special job.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's the first thing people say when you say you're a teacher is they're like, "Oh, how rewarding!" And you're like, "Yeah, I know, because you get paid fucking nothing and you're doing everything." And it's like, you're like, "Yeah, that's a reason why it's so rewarding."
And why is that? And you know, why is that? Every job that requires a human being to be absolutely dedicated and passionate, right, with what they're teaching, why are those jobs rewarded financially so least to anything else? You know, it's absurd, really, that that's happening. And like you said, you know, there is so much, and then on top admin, and then they're required to teach children life skills that parents should be teaching their children at home. It starts at home. So there is this, you know, there is this importance of our children just being out playing and, you know, focusing on not just the cognitive development, but then just, you know, like what we see in Sweden, what we see in Norway, Denmark, you know, children out playing and, you know, engaging those sort of social skills, but the executive functioning skills of sitting at the table and sitting down to eat, right? Following through on little puzzles that they'll do, crayon and coloring for more than just 2 minutes. I'm done, next thing. Because, you know, there's so many plastic toys everywhere that they can't even focus on one thing, and it's like straight onto something else. all of those little life lessons that start at home are all what help those executive functioning skills that by the time, you know, they're in reception or they're in nursery, they have developed those already and are continuing to develop those. And you know, I hear more of those stories now from teachers, you know, that the time is now becoming longer and longer in which parents are dragging out, you know, not teaching kids to eat on their own, just children eating on their own, you know, or knowing where to put things. I mean, your job is good, right? Your job is really good. But like, you know, 5, 6 years old, like, they're gone, you know, and you're like, yeah. You know, I've raised them to be, you know, in a space where they're feeling, you know, confident to go off. And that's not to say that if your child's not, you don't get into that space. Again, it's practical parenting, those skills that I teach families, but not at the point that we're talking about, which is honest. Those teachers that are saying, I don't understand how, you know, what I'm doing now requires me to do all these other things that I have actually taught my child to do at home. And why are these parents not doing that? So it's the grey area, Sophie and Giles. It's the grey area. Just because we are working 2 jobs, just because we don't always get a chance to sit down and eat with our family, does that mean that we don't teach the importance of our children getting used to eating with a knife and fork, or sitting down and having, you know, better table manners, or learning to just sit at the table without getting up 10, 15 times, you know, to sit down and just enjoy the meal that we have, instead of, you know, the parent being at the kitchen sink, watching, nibbling on a couple of grapes while the children, you know, are at the table. And some of that stuff has gone completely over parents' heads. Like, oh, they don't know. They're not, they're not educated in knowing that. And so it's important to educate them in recognizing, no, sit with your child. Bring the high chair to the table. Sit down and shadow over their hand when you're teaching them to use the knife and the fork. Place the knife in between the grooves of the fork to steady it as they are cutting. The small little skills that you can teach parents to, you know, enable their child to become more capable, because being more capable really genuinely creates more self-esteem. That's genuine, not the buzzword, more self-esteem, no, genuine self-esteem. I did that, you know, I was capable of being able to do that. That means I'll be able to do this task as well. So, you know, they're the small little kind of huge skills that parents need to become more educated about to help their children and not disable them. Otherwise, they end up doing it longer and longer. And there you go, concierge.